Hi, I'm Hallie. 5 minutes ago, I got a text that changed everything. Your sister just got arrested at LAX with $1.8 million in cash. But here's the thing, I'm the one who sent the FBI after her. And 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be responsible for putting my own sister in federal prison, I would have laughed in their face. Because Victoria wasn't just my sister, she was my business partner, my closest friend, and the person I trusted with my life savings. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about how someone can systematically destroy your life while convincing you that you're losing your mind. It's about the moment you realize that the person sitting across from you at family dinner has been planning your destruction for years. And it's about what happens when nice girls finally decide to stop being nice. This story starts exactly 1,147 days ago, with a phone call that should have been my first warning. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and suddenly everyone goes quiet? That's how my entire life felt for months before I figured out what was really happening. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that family drama was normal, that maybe I was just stressed from running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm while raising a teenager alone. But your gut knows things your mind refuses to accept, doesn't it? Let me paint you the picture of how this all started to unravel. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I was sitting in my kitchen, the kind of morning where the coffee tastes bitter no matter how much cream you add. My phone buzzed with a text from my ex-husband Marcus. We'd been divorced for 3 years, and he only texted me about our daughter Emma's school stuff. But this message was different. I warned you about her. Hallie, you should have listened. No context. No explanation. Just that cryptic message that made my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster. I never bought a ticket for, see, Marcus had always been suspicious of my sister Victoria. He'd say things like, "She smiles too much when she talks about your success," or, "Have you noticed how she always asks about your business finances at family dinners?" I used to defend her. God. I used to defend her. The real wake-up call came 3 days later when I was cleaning out my father's study. He'd passed away 6 months earlier from a sudden heart attack, and we'd been putting off sorting through his things. You know how it is. Dealing with a parent's belongings feels like accepting they're really gone. My mother Grace was there, sitting in the corner like a decorative pillow. And Victoria was doing what she always did, taking charge with the efficiency of a surgeon. "Hand me that red folder," Victoria said without looking up from her clipboard. She'd brought a clipboard to sort through our father's memories. That should have been my first clue. I passed her the folder and watched her flip through it like she was sorting junk mail. Everything went into neat piles. Keep, donate, trash. No sentimentality. No pausing to remember. Just clinical sorting. I found myself studying her face, looking for some crack in that perfect composure, some sign that this affected her the way it was affecting me. Nothing. That's when I saw it. A book wedged between two accounting ledgers, almost hidden. Building family trust in business. Subtle, right? My father wasn't exactly known for his light reading. I pulled it out, thinking maybe I'd find some margin notes, some insight into how his mind worked. Instead, a letter fell out and landed on my shoe like a feather carrying a boulder's weight. The handwriting was unmistakably his, that precise, blocky style he used for everything important. I unfolded it slowly, the paper yellow with age, and read words that made my entire world tilt sideways. Both of my daughters should have equal control and equal stake in the business. Victoria's ambition is admirable, but Hallie's heart is what will sustain what we've built. This is my true wish. I felt the blood drain from my face. That wasn't what Victoria had read to us 2 weeks after the funeral. The will she'd presented gave her complete control as executor. With advisory input from me, I'd sat there in that lawyer's office, numb with grief, nodding along as she read about streamlined decision-making and unified leadership. I'd signed papers I barely read because I trusted her, because she was my sister, because the idea that she would lie to me was more impossible than the idea that I was losing my mind. But here was the proof, in my father's own handwriting. The signature on this letter had that little flourish he only used for personal correspondence. The will's signature? Clean? Formal? Like something traced from a template. I need to pause here and tell you something that happened 6 months before my father died. Something I only understood in that moment. Standing in his study with that letter in my hands, Victoria had insisted on handling Dad's medical affairs when he got sick. "You're too emotional, Hallie," she'd said. "Let me deal with the doctors and insurance." I was grateful. I was drowning trying to keep the business running while spending every evening at the hospital. What I didn't know was that Victoria had been recording every conversation with Dad's doctors. Not for medical reasons, for legal ones. She needed proof that Dad was mentally compromised in his final months. Because if she could prove he wasn't competent when he wrote that letter I was holding, she could contest it in court. But Dad was smarter than both of us. The letter was dated 8 months before his diagnosis. He'd seen this coming long before any of us realized what Victoria was capable of. I looked up from the letter to find Victoria watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not concern, not curiosity, calculation. Like she was doing math in her head, figuring out how much I'd discovered and what it would cost her. "Find something interesting?" she asked, and her voice had that same tone she used with difficult clients. "Just old business notes," I lied, folding the letter and slipping it into my pocket. Something in her eyes flickered. Relief? Disappointment? I couldn't tell anymore. That night, I drove home in complete silence. Emma was at a sleepover, so the house felt like a museum of my life, all the artifacts of who I used to be before I knew what I know now. I went straight to my home office and opened the small safe my father had given me 5 years earlier. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in ages: birth certificates, insurance papers, and a thick envelope with my name written in his handwriting. On the front, it said, "If they turn on each other, they," not she, "they," like he knew this day would come. Inside that envelope was a copy of a power of attorney I'd signed 18 months earlier. I remembered that day vividly now. Emma had the flu. Our payroll system had crashed, and I was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. Victoria had come into my office looking composed and slightly annoyed. "This is just standard paperwork," she'd said, laying the document in front of me while I was on a conference call with a client having a meltdown. "It protects both of us if one of us is ever incapacitated or overwhelmed. Pure formality." I was juggling a screaming client, a sick kid, and a computer system that seemed designed by someone who hated efficiency. I signed it without reading it. I signed away my financial freedom because I was tired and because I trusted my sister. Now I understood what that signature had really done. The document gave her power of attorney over any account related to family business interests, including our joint college fund for Emma. I opened my laptop with hands that weren't quite steady and logged into the college fund account. The balance made me physically nauseous. $147,333, $420,000, gone. The withdrawal history showed a pattern that was as methodical as it was devastating. Small amounts at first, coded as educational expense reallocation. Then larger chunks labeled family investment opportunities. All of it happening while I was focused on keeping our business thriving through a pandemic. while I was making sure our employees kept their jobs, while I was being the responsible one. The last withdrawal was dated just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. She'd been bleeding that account dry right up until the moment I might discover it. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't desperation. This was systematic theft, planned and executed over nearly 2 years. While I was working 60-hour weeks to build something we could both be proud of, she was quietly dismantling everything I'd worked to secure for my daughter's future. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house. Grace lived in the same Tudor-style home where we'd grown up, where Victoria and I had shared a bedroom until we were 13, where we'd whispered secrets and planned our futures like we'd always be on the same team. Grace was in her garden, deadheading roses with the focused intensity of someone who found peace in small, controllable tasks. She looked up when I approached, and I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, maybe, or resignation. "I need to ask you something," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Did you know about the college fund?" She set down her pruning shears and dusted off her hands, taking just a little too long to meet my eyes. "I don't get involved in your business affairs." "Hallie, this isn't business." "Mom, this is my daughter's education. This is her future." "Victoria has always been better with financial planning," she said finally. "Maybe she had a good reason." A good reason. $420,000. And my own mother thought there might be a good reason. "She stole from her own niece," I said, and my voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. "She stole from Emma." Grace picked up her pruning shears again, focusing intently on a rose that looked perfectly fine to me. "Family is complicated, Hallie. Sometimes we have to trust that everyone is doing their best." That's when Grace said something that made my blood freeze. "The house is in Victoria's name now. Anyway." "What?" "She said it was for tax purposes. Something about estate planning." Grace's voice was small, ashamed. "She had me sign some papers last month, said it would protect my assets if you ever sued the company." I stared at my mother, this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about right and wrong, and realized she wasn't just an enabler. She was another victim. Victoria hadn't just stolen from me. She'd manipulated a grieving widow into signing away her own home. "Mom," I said gently, "did you read those papers before you signed them?" The way her face crumpled told me everything I needed to know. Victoria had stolen Grace's house, just like she'd stolen Emma's future. And she'd done it by convincing Grace that I was the threat. I left without saying goodbye and drove straight to Victoria's office. Our office. The building I'd helped finance, with my name still on the lease, though apparently not for much longer. Victoria was in a client meeting when I arrived, but I didn't care. I walked past her assistant, past the conference room full of people in expensive suits, and stood in the doorway until she had no choice but to acknowledge me. "I need to speak with you," I said. "Now." She excused herself with the smooth professionalism she was known for and followed me to her office, the corner office that had been mine until she'd somehow maneuvered it away from me with talk of better client sightlines and more efficient workflow. "Did you move money from Emma's college fund?" I asked, before she'd even closed the door. "I redistributed some family assets for better investment opportunities," she said, settling behind her desk like she was the CEO and I was a difficult employee. "Everything I did was within my legal authority." "Your legal authority?" I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. That money was for Emma's education. That money was sitting in a low-yield account earning practically nothing. I've been investing it in opportunities that will triple the return by the time Emma graduates. She said this with the confidence of someone who'd practiced the explanation. Smooth, reasonable, financially sound. Except for one problem. Show me, I said. Show me these investments. Show me the returns. Something flickered across her face. So quickly I almost missed it. The portfolios are complex. I can have my financial advisor prepare a report. I don't want a report. I want to see the actual accounts. Right now. Hallie, you're being emotional about this. This is exactly why I handle the finances. You let your feelings cloud your judgment. Emotional. There it was, the word she'd been using to dismiss me for months. Every time I questioned a decision, every time I pushed back on her streamlined processes, every time I dared to have an opinion that differed from hers, emotional. Victoria, I said, and my voice was steady now, clear. Where is my daughter's college money? She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her weighing her options. Deny everything? Double down on the investment story? Or finally tell me the truth? Some of it was needed to keep the business afloat during the slow season. She said finally, it was temporary. A bridge loan. A bridge loan. From my daughter's college fund? Without asking me. Without even telling me. How much? I asked. It's complicated. How much, Victoria? About 200,000, but the business is profitable again now. I can pay it back with interest. About 200,000. I looked at her sitting behind that mahogany desk, in her perfect navy blazer, with her perfect, confident smile, and I realized she was still lying. The account had been drained of $420,000, and she was admitting to half of it, testing to see if I knew the real numbers. That's when I understood that this conversation wasn't about clearing up a misunderstanding. It was about Victoria deciding how much truth I could handle, how much she could get away with, how much of my daughter's future she could steal before I found the spine to stop her. I walked out of that office knowing that my sister, the person I'd trusted with my business, my father's legacy, and my daughter's future, wasn't family anymore. She was something else entirely. Something that wore my sister's face but operated with the cold calculation of a stranger who'd been planning this betrayal for longer than I wanted to imagine. The real question wasn't what Victoria had done. The real question was what I was going to do about it. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than confusion and hurt settling in my chest. I felt clarity, sharp, cold, and absolutely certain. My daughter deserved better than this. I deserved better than this. And Victoria was about to learn that being emotional and being weak are two completely different things. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after your world has been completely shattered and rebuilt in a single night. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and impulsive. What I felt was cold, methodical, and absolutely lethal. Victoria had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me for so long that she'd forgotten I was the one who'd built the investigative systems that made our consulting firm so successful. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "What Victoria doesn't know, I know." Then I started listing everything. Every access code she'd forgotten I had. Every backup system I'd installed without telling her. Every paper trail she probably thought was safely buried. You see, when you build a business from scratch, you learn to be paranoid about documentation. I'd spent years creating redundant systems, backup files, and paper trails for everything. Not because I expected betrayal from my own sister, but because I'd learned that in business, People's memories become mysteriously selective when money is involved. At 8 a.m. sharp, I called my accountant, Janet Rodriguez. Janet had been with us since year 2, and she was the kind of person who noticed when numbers didn't add up, even by a penny. "Hallie, I was hoping you'd call," she said, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "I've been seeing some irregularities in the accounts. Nothing I could put my finger on, but—" "But what?" "Well, there have been some transfers that don't match the board authorizations I have on file, and some expenses that seem creative." Janet was choosing her words carefully, which meant she suspected something but didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. That's when I knew I wasn't losing my mind. "Can you meet me today? Somewhere private?" 2 hours later, we were sitting in a coffee shop downtown, surrounded by the anonymous chatter of strangers. Janet had brought a laptop bag that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. "Show me everything," I said. What Janet showed me made Victoria's theft of Emma's college fund look like pocket change. Over the past 18 months, she'd been systematically moving money between accounts, creating fictional consulting contracts, and billing the company for personal expenses. The beach house she'd bought in Malibu, paid for with company funds and listed as a client retreat facility. The lease on her new BMW, executive transportation allowance, the $30,000 she'd spent renovating her kitchen, home office improvements for client meetings. But the most damaging discovery was a series of email exchanges Janet had accidentally been copied on. Victoria had been in talks with Harrison and Associates, our biggest competitor, about a potential acquisition. Not a merger where we'd both benefit, but a buyout where she'd sell our client list and intellectual property, then stay on as a highly paid consultant while I'd be eliminated. "There's more," Janet said, pulling up another file. "She's been backdating contracts and altering client billing records. Some of our biggest clients have been overcharged by tens of thousands of dollars, and the extra money has been flowing into accounts I can't track." I stared at the laptop screen, watching months of betrayal unfold in spreadsheet form. This wasn't just theft, it was fraud on a massive scale. Victoria hadn't just stolen from me and Emma, she'd been stealing from our clients, our employees, and the government through false tax filings. After Janet finished showing me the financial records, I knew I needed professional help. That afternoon, I hired Sarah Chen, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. When we met the next day, Sarah pulled up something on her laptop that made me feel sick. "Your sister didn't just steal your money, Hallie. She cloned your digital identity." On the screen were dozens of accounts I'd never opened, credit cards, investment portfolios, even a cryptocurrency wallet. All in my name. All linked to addresses I'd never lived at. Victoria had been living a parallel financial life as me for over 2 years. "This is identity theft on a level I've rarely seen," Sarah continued. "She's been using your credit to fund her lifestyle while systematically destroying your actual credit score. Look at this." The screen showed my real credit report. What should have been an 800-plus score was down to 542. Victoria had been defaulting on loans taken out in my name while making sure I never received the bills. She wasn't just planning to take your business, Hallie. She was planning to take your entire financial identity. If this had gone on much longer, you wouldn't have been able to get a credit card, let alone fight her in court. "Janet," I said quietly, "I need you to copy everything onto an external drive, and I need you to do it in a way that can't be traced back to you." She nodded without hesitation. "Already done. I've been backing up everything for months because something felt off." That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. Sarah Chen came highly recommended by a lawyer friend, and she specialized in corporate fraud cases. We met at her office, a modest space that looked more like a library than a detective agency. "Before we start," Sarah said, "I need you to understand that once we begin pulling this thread, there's no going back. If your sister has been as thorough as you suspect, this investigation could destroy your family relationships permanently." I thought about Emma, about her college dreams, about the Stanford acceptance letter that would never come now because of Victoria's greed. I thought about my father, who'd trusted both of us to honor what he'd built. I thought about the employees who depended on our company for their livelihoods, unknowing that their CEO was a criminal. My family relationships were destroyed the moment she decided to steal from her own niece, I said. I just didn't know it yet. Sarah nodded and opened a thick folder. "Let's start with what you know, and then I'll tell you what we can prove." Over the next 3 hours, I laid out everything: the forged power of attorney, the missing college fund, the falsified will, the suspicious business expenses. Sarah took notes in a shorthand that looked like hieroglyphics, occasionally asking questions that made me realize just how deep this conspiracy went. "Your sister is sophisticated," Sarah said finally. "She's been planning this for at least 2 years, maybe longer. The question is, who else knows?" That question haunted me as I drove home. Who else was involved? Grace had to know something. Her non-reaction to my accusations had been too calculated. But who else? Which of our employees? Which of our board members? How many people had I trusted who were actually working against me? Emma was home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread around her like a paper fortress. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw something in her expression that made my heart break. Wariness. My own daughter was watching me like she wasn't sure what mood I'd be in. "How was school?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Weird," she said, not looking up from her chemistry textbook. "Mrs. Patterson asked me if you were okay because you seemed stressed at the parent conference last week." I sat down across from her, careful not to disturb her homework ecosystem. "Emma, I need to tell you something about your college fund." She set down her pen and looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for 17. "How bad is it?" "Pretty bad. Most of the money is gone." I watched her process this, waiting for tears or anger or panic. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "Aunt Victoria?" The fact that she wasn't surprised told me everything I needed to know about how obvious this betrayal had been to everyone except me. "How did you know?" "She's been asking me weird questions about college costs and financial aid, and she kept talking about how expensive Stanford is. Like, she was trying to convince me I didn't really want to go there." Emma's voice was steady, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Also, she's been acting weird around you for months. Like, guilty weird." My 17-year-old daughter had seen what I'd been too trusting to notice. That realization hit me harder than any of Victoria's financial betrayals. "I'm going to fix this," I told her. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to fix this." "Mom," Emma said, and her voice was gentle in a way that made me realize our roles had shifted somehow. "Maybe it's not about fixing it. Maybe it's about stopping her from doing it to someone else." Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with our 3 board members: Marcus Thompson, no relation to my ex-husband; Diana Walsh; and Robert Chen, Sarah's uncle, as it turned out. I'd been dreading this conversation because I wasn't sure who I could trust, but Emma's words had given me clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. We met at my house, away from the office where Victoria might have installed surveillance. Yes, I was paranoid now, but paranoia felt safer than the naive trust that had gotten me into this mess. I need to share some information with you, I began, and I need to know if any of you have noticed irregularities in our financial reporting. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus cleared his throat. Hallie, we've been waiting for you to bring this up for months. My heart stopped. You knew? We suspected, Diana said carefully. There have been decisions made without board approval, contracts signed without proper oversight, expenses that didn't make sense. But Victoria always had explanations, and she's very persuasive. Why didn't you come to me? Robert shifted uncomfortably. Because according to the corporate documents we have on file, Victoria is the primary decision maker. You're listed as a consultant. I felt the room tilt. That's not. I'm the CEO. I founded this company. Not according to the paperwork Victoria filed with the state 6 months ago. Marcus said gently, according to those documents, she's been the majority owner and CEO since your father's death. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen my entire identity as a business owner. On paper, I was now an employee of the company I'd built from nothing. She forged my signature, I said, and my voice sounded strange and distant. Can you prove that? Diana asked. That's when I realized the full scope of what I was up against. Victoria hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been systematically erasing me from my own life, and she'd been doing it so carefully, so legally, that proving the truth would be nearly impossible. But nearly impossible isn't the same as impossible. Yes, I said, thinking of the files Janet had copied, the evidence Sarah was gathering, the trail of breadcrumbs Victoria had been too arrogant to cover completely. Yes, I can prove it. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope slipped under my front door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a single photograph. Victoria and me at Emma's 16th birthday party, both of us smiling at the camera. But someone had drawn a red X over my face. No note, no explanation, just that photo with its stark message. You're marked for elimination. I should have been scared. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement. Victoria was worried enough to resort to amateur intimidation tactics, which meant I was getting close to something she desperately wanted to hide. I called Sarah immediately. She's escalating, Sarah said when I described the photo. People only resort to intimidation when legal maneuvering isn't working anymore. What have you done differently in the last 48 hours? I told her about the board meeting, about discovering the forged ownership documents, about Janet's evidence files. She knows you're building a case, Sarah said. Which means she's going to accelerate whatever endgame she's been planning. We need to move faster. What do you mean? I mean, your sister isn't just stealing from you anymore. She's positioning herself to destroy you completely before you can expose her. We need to get ahead of this. That afternoon, Sarah called with news that made my blood run cold. I've been monitoring Victoria's financial activity, she said. This morning, she liquidated 3 major investment accounts and transferred the money offshore. We're talking about $1.2 million that just disappeared into untraceable accounts in the Cayman Islands. She's running? She's preparing to, but there's more. I found evidence that she's been in contact with a crisis management firm, the kind that specializes in destroying people's reputations before they can defend themselves. Hallie, I think she's planning to frame you for everything she's done. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The forged ownership documents that made me look like a disgruntled employee. The missing college fund that could be blamed on my mismanagement. The altered contracts and inflated expenses that could all be traced back to access codes I'd shared with her in good faith. Victoria wasn't just stealing from me, she was setting me up to take the fall for her crimes. "What do we do?" I asked. "We beat her to the punch," Sarah said. "Tomorrow morning, we file a comprehensive complaint with the FBI's white-collar crime division. We present everything at once: the theft, the fraud, the forgery, the money laundering. We tell the story before she has a chance to tell hers." That night, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by boxes of evidence, and wrote a letter to Emma. Not because I thought I was going to jail, but because I wanted her to understand why I'd chosen to fight instead of just walking away. "Your Aunt Victoria thinks I'm weak because I trusted her," I wrote. "She thinks kindness is stupidity and that family loyalty is a weapon to be used against the people who love you. She's about to learn that there's a difference between being trusting and being weak. And the difference is this: when someone you love betrays that trust, a weak person crumbles, a strong person fights back." As I sealed the envelope, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Last chance to walk away quietly. Some fights aren't worth winning." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "You're right. Some fights aren't worth winning. Lucky for me, this isn't a fight. It's justice." Then I blocked the number, finished organizing my evidence files, and went to bed. Tomorrow, Victoria would learn that the sister she'd underestimated for so long had been paying attention all along. And I was about to remind her that the people who build things from nothing don't go down without a fight. The FBI field office in downtown felt like stepping into a different universe, one where justice wasn't a luxury but a right, where evidence mattered more than family connections, and where Victoria's perfect smile wouldn't save her from the consequences of her choices. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the stern, intimidating figure I'd imagined, she was a woman about my age with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of financial fraud imaginable. But when she started reviewing our evidence, those kind eyes became laser-focused. "Mrs. Parker," she said after 2 hours of reviewing documents, "in 20 years of investigating white-collar crime, I've rarely seen fraud this systematic and this personal. Your sister didn't just steal from you. She orchestrated a complete identity theft while maintaining the facade of family loyalty." Sarah had prepared me for this moment, but hearing it from an FBI agent made it real in a way that hit me like a physical blow. What happens now? Now we build a case that's so airtight. She can't wriggle out of it with expensive lawyers and family sympathy. Agent Morrison said, "But I need you to understand something. Once we move forward, this becomes public. Your business, your family, your personal finances, everything will be scrutinized. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Emma, who'd already had to explain to her friends why she couldn't go to Stanford. I thought about our employees, who deserved to know their livelihoods weren't built on criminal activity. I thought about my father, who'd trusted both of us to honor his legacy. "Agent Morrison," I said, "my sister has spent 2 years systematically destroying everything I built while making me question my own sanity. If going public is what it takes to stop her from doing this to someone else, then yes, I'm ready." But Victoria was smarter than I'd given her credit for. While we were building our case, she was building hers. I found out just how smart 3 days later when I arrived at my office to find the locks changed and a security guard posted at the entrance. The guard handed me an envelope with my name on it, looking uncomfortable about whatever role he'd been forced to play in this drama. Inside was a letter from the board of directors, the same board members who'd expressed concern about Victoria's activities just days earlier. The letter informed me that I was suspended pending an investigation into financial irregularities and potential embezzlement. I read the letter twice, my hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt like electricity. Victoria had managed to flip the narrative. Somehow, she'd convinced the board that I was the one who'd been stealing. I called Diana Walsh immediately. "Diana, what the hell is this letter?" There was a long pause. "Hallie, we received some very disturbing information about transfers from the college fund and irregularities in expense reporting. Victoria provided documentation showing that you've been—" "Victoria provided documentation? Diana, she's the one who stole the money. I know this is difficult, but the evidence she presented was quite compelling. Bank transfers with your authorization codes, expense reports with your signature." I hung up before I said something that would only make the situation worse. Victoria had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every document I'd signed in good faith, every access code I'd shared, every moment of trust had been weaponized against me. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated Agent Morrison. My phone rang within an hour. "Mrs. Parker, I've just received some interesting information," Agent Morrison said. "It seems your sister has been very busy. She filed a complaint against you with the state attorney general this morning, claiming you've been embezzling funds and that she only discovered it recently." Can she do that? She can try. But here's what she doesn't know. We've been monitoring her communications since yesterday. Every call, every email, every text message. We have recordings of her coaching the board members on what to say, and we have evidence of her bribing at least one of them. The next few hours were a blur of legal maneuvering that I barely understood. Injunctions and counter-injunctions, temporary restraining orders, and emergency hearings. Sarah explained it to me in simple terms. Victoria is trying to bury you in legal paperwork while she escapes with the evidence. But the FBI is faster than civil court. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, I was sitting in Agent Morrison's office when her phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, and smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Mrs. Parker," she said after hanging up, "I have some news. Your sister was just arrested at LAX attempting to board a flight to Switzerland with $1.8 million in bearer bonds and a second passport." The relief I felt was so overwhelming that I started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when pressure you didn't even know you were carrying finally releases. But the real vindication came 3 days later when Agent Morrison called with an update that changed everything. "We cracked her laptop," she said. "Hallie, what we found is going to shock you." Victoria hadn't just been stealing from me and the company. She'd been running a sophisticated fraud operation that involved at least 6 other businesses, 12 individual victims, and what appeared to be a network of accomplices including 2 lawyers, an accountant, and a bank manager. The college fund theft was just the tip of the iceberg. Victoria had been operating what the FBI called a long-term confidence scheme where she'd gain the trust of family members and business partners, gradually assume control of their finances, and then systematically drain their accounts while building legal defenses against discovery. I wasn't her first victim. I was just her most valuable one. "There's more," Agent Morrison continued. "We found communications dating back 3 years where she explicitly discusses neutralizing Hallie's influence and preparing the family for transition. She's been planning your elimination since before your father died." The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a calculated, multi-year campaign to destroy my life. But the most shocking discovery came when they analyzed the forged documents. The handwriting expert concluded that Victoria had been practicing my signature for over 2 years. They found notebooks full of practice signatures, along with detailed notes about my mannerisms, my decision-making patterns, and my exploitable weaknesses. She'd been studying me like a predator studies prey. The media attention was intense, but surprisingly supportive. The story of a sister who'd systematically stolen from her own family while maintaining a facade of success resonated with people who'd experienced their own betrayals. I received hundreds of letters from women who'd been financially abused by family members, partners, or business associates. But the letter that meant the most came from an unexpected source: Grace. "Hallie," she wrote, "I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue. I knew something was wrong, but I chose to believe Victoria's explanations because they were easier than facing the truth. I was a coward, and my cowardice enabled her to hurt you and Emma. I can't undo that, but I want you to know that I'm testifying against her at trial. Some truths are more important than family loyalty." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Victoria's defense team tried every strategy imaginable, claiming I was a vindictive sister seeking revenge, suggesting that our father had actually intended for her to have control, even attempting to argue that taking money from family wasn't real theft. None of it worked. The moment that broke Victoria's defense came on day 4 of the trial. The prosecutor played a recording from Victoria's phone, a conversation she'd had with someone the FBI identified as Marcus Reed, a professional reputation management consultant. The college fund was perfect. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom. "She'll never check it until Emma graduates, and by then I'll have everything transferred offshore. The beauty is that even if she discovers it, who's going to believe that a sister would steal from her own niece? I'll just say she's having a breakdown from the divorce stress." Marcus Reed's voice responded, "And if she gets suspicious? Then we accelerate the timeline. I've already got the board primed to remove her. They think she's been embezzling. I made sure of that. If she starts asking questions, she'll find herself unemployed and under investigation. By the time she figures out what happened, I'll be in Switzerland with enough money to disappear forever." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Victoria's expensive defense attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Because those words, spoken in her own voice, with casual cruelty, revealed exactly who Victoria really was. Not a desperate sister making bad choices. A predator who had calculated every move. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, money laundering, and racketeering. But the moment that will stay with me forever happened during the sentencing hearing. Victoria was given the opportunity to make a statement before the judge announced her sentence. I expected her to maintain her innocence, to blame me, to continue the manipulations that had defined our relationship for so long. Instead, she looked directly at me for the first time since her arrest and said, "I'm sorry, Hallie. I'm sorry for all of it. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something." Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Victoria to 12 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $2.3 million in restitution. It was the harshest sentence possible under the guidelines, and Judge Williams made it clear why. "Ms. Victoria Parker," she said, "you didn't just steal money. You stole trust, security, and peace of mind from people who loved you. You weaponized family bonds and exploited the very relationships that should have been sacred. The court finds your actions particularly egregious because they were committed against family members who had no reason to suspect your betrayal." The restitution meant that Emma's college fund would be restored, plus damages. But more importantly, It meant that Victoria's other victims would be compensated for their losses. 6 months after the sentencing, I was sitting in my rebuilt office. The company had survived the scandal and was actually thriving under new management, when Emma walked in with a letter. "Stanford called," she said, grinning. "They're holding my acceptance for next year, and they're offering me a scholarship to cover what the restitution doesn't." We hugged, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. Not because Victoria was in prison, but because Emma and I had survived something that should have destroyed us, and we'd come out stronger. But the moment that changed everything happened 6 months after Victoria's sentencing. I was giving a speech at a conference about financial abuse when a woman in the front row stood up during the Q&A. "Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice shaking. "My name is Jennifer Morrison. Yes, the FBI agent who worked your case. I'm here today not as an agent, but as someone whose sister almost destroyed her family the same way Victoria destroyed yours." The room went completely silent. "Your case didn't just put Victoria in prison," she continued. "It gave me the courage to investigate my own sister, who had been stealing from our elderly parents for 3 years. Because of your willingness to speak up, we recovered over $300,000 and prevented her from putting our parents into bankruptcy." That's when I understood that Victoria's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had been transformed into something powerful. Not just justice for our family, but protection for countless others. After the conference, Jennifer and I started what became the National Family Financial Abuse Registry, a database that tracks patterns of family financial crimes and helps law enforcement identify serial perpetrators before they can destroy more families. To date, we've helped recover over $12 million for 847 families. Emma, now in her second year at Stanford Law, interns with us every summer. She's already helped prosecute 2 cases similar to ours. And Victoria, she writes to me from prison occasionally. Her letters have changed over the years: less manipulation, more genuine remorse. In her last letter, she said something that I think about often. "I told myself I was smarter than everyone else, but the truth is, I was just more willing to hurt people than you were. I thought that made me strong. I was wrong about everything. Here's what I want you to understand. Victoria didn't betray me because I was weak or naive or trusting. She betrayed me because that's who she chose to be. And I survived not because I was strong, but because I chose to fight back when fighting back seemed impossible." If someone you love is stealing from you, financially, emotionally, or otherwise, your silence won't save them. Your silence will only enable them to hurt more people. Your voice, your courage, your willingness to say, "This is wrong," that's what saves people. That's what creates justice. That's what transforms tragedy into purpose. Emma graduates from law school next year. The foundation helps a new family every week. Victoria has 8 more years in prison to think about her choices. And me, I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that everything I have was earned honestly, that every relationship I maintain is based on truth, and that my daughter has learned that integrity isn't something you compromise, even for family. Especially for family. If you take nothing else from my story, remember this: trust your instincts, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that you're being too emotional when something feels wrong. Your emotions might be the only warning system you have, and if you're currently living through something like this, if someone you love is making you question your own memory, your own judgment, your own worth, please know that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and you're not powerless. The person hurting you is counting on your silence. Don't give them that gift. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go write yours. But this time, Make sure you're the hero.